James Clear, one of my heroes. Welcome to the show.
Hi, great to talk to you.
I've been following your work for quite some time. I don't know exactly what year, maybe since 2011, 2012, but I was on your email list and I was always really inspired by how you communicate ideas.
Thank you. Yeah, I started writing at jamesclear.com in November of 2012, so you're one of the originals. Thank you.
Dang, OG. And you wrote a book called Atomic Habits that came out. It's been out for a couple years now, right?
October 2018. So next month will be 2 years exactly. Yeah.
And it's an amazing book, and I can personally say that I've read it several times. And what made you decide to switch from writing these in depth, incredible articles on jamesclear.com to writing a book?
Um, well, I think there's probably a bigger principle hidden in here for anything, not just writing, but fitness or developing any skill really, which is early on, I felt like I needed to write articles to kind of hone my skills. There's a lot of stuff that happens when you put in your reps early, like you get better at the skill itself, you discover your voice, you kind of test different ideas and figure out like what you like and what you like writing about. I needed to sort of discover all of that and figure out what topics interested me, but also interested readers, because not everything I wanted to write about, people wanted to hear my take on. So there's a lot of that trial and error that's happening. There's a lot of like skill development that's happening. So I was doing that for the first 3 years or so. And as the audience started to grow and I started to find my footing as an author a little bit more, I started to write more about habits and strategy and decision making and all the stuff that I kind of write about now. And I never started with the intention of being an author. I just sort of gradually found myself enjoying writing more and more. And then at some point, a few agents reached out and were like, "Hey, have you thought about writing a book?" Or a publisher would send me an email every now and then and say, "If you're ever interested in making this a book, let us know." So I was starting to hear it from different people. And once I heard it from maybe five or six people, I was like, okay, now maybe I should think about this seriously. Like maybe this is the next step. So it happened gradually. And it's funny because I thought the transition from one to the other would be smoother than it was. But really, the first year of writing Atomic Habits was just me figuring out like how to put everything in order, how to develop the outline. Because writing a big long book where you go from chapter one to chapter two to chapter three is much different than writing like fragmented individual articles. So there are a variety of learning curves with that too, but it was very much a gradual evolution.
I love that you said you did the reps early, and that's in your book talking about doing the reps in order to create a habit. And also, you talked about becoming a writer, and becoming a writer is part of an identity, but writing is how
Mm.
you become a writer. Can we talk about? Well, we'll just go into the book. Can we talk about the four laws of behavior change, and then eventually we'll get into the reps and the identity based habits.
Sure. So I think roughly, if you're just thinking about it from a high level, if you want a good habit to stick, you sort of need about four things kind of working in your favor. And you don't always have to have all four, but the more that you have, the more likely it is that a good habit will stick or that you can get a bad habit to break. So roughly speaking, those four things, which I call the four laws of behavior change, are you want to make it obvious. You want your good habits to be obvious, available, visible, easy to see, easy to get your attention. The easier it is to see, the easier it is for you to notice, the more likely you are to start the habit. The second law is to make it attractive. So the more attractive or appealing or desirable a habit is, the more likely you are to feel motivated to do it. The third law is to make it easy. So the easier, more convenient, frictionless, simple a habit is, the more likely it is to occur. And then the fourth and final law is that you want to make it satisfying. So the more satisfying or enjoyable a habit is, the more likely it is to stick in the long run. And so make it obvious, make it attractive, make it easy, make it satisfying. Those four laws, they connect to this kind of four-step process that I have for describing a habit, which has been utilized by many people before. They kind of describe these different stages. And it's sort of like the scientific explanation for how a habit works, which is you go through these four steps of there's some kind of cue, which is the thing that makes it obvious to you or that you notice. There's some type of craving, which is a prediction that your brain makes. And then there's the response and then the reward. And so cue, craving, response, reward, make it obvious, make it attractive, make it easy, make it satisfying. Um, I do want to mention just one other thing, which is those four laws describe how to get a good habit to stick. If you want to break a bad habit, then you just invert those four. So rather than making it obvious, you want to make it invisible. Unsubscribe from emails, or, like reduce the odds that you're going to see the cue. Rather than making it attractive, make it unattractive. Rather than making it easy, make it difficult. Rather than making it satisfying, make it unsatisfying. So obviously the book covers that in a lot more detail, and I can give specific examples on each one, but those are kind of the four laws of behavior change and this kind of high level framework for how to troubleshoot your habits or approach them to get them to stick.
Yeah, and something that I had never heard before that you wrote about in your book is creating habits based on an identity. Can you talk about that?
So a lot of the time when we talk about habits, we talk about the habits as being the pathway to external results. It'll help you lose weight or make more money or be more productive or, win a championship or whatever. And it's true. Habits can help you do all of those things, which is great. But I think the real reason that habits matter is not external, but internal. They give you evidence that shifts the narrative that you have about yourself. They help you change your story or believe something new about yourself. And this is what I refer to as identity based habits. And the core idea is that true behavior change is really identity change. Like once you start to look at yourself in a new way or have a new story for how you describe yourself, you're not even really trying to change your behavior anymore. You're just acting in alignment with the type of person that you already see yourself to be. And so the real goal is not to like run a marathon. The goal is to become a runner. The goal is not to read 20 books a year. It's to become a reader. The goal is not to do a silent meditation retreat. It's to become a meditator. And those identities, I'm a runner, I'm a reader, I'm a meditator, I'm an athlete, I'm a leader, I'm whatever, they can be a really meaningful way to change your behavior in the long run. So ultimately, I think this comes back to habits because habits provide repeated evidence for the type of person that you are. And I think we could even say that every action you take is like a vote for the type of person you want to become. And so, no, doing one workout does not make you a champion, but it does cast a vote for I'm the type of person who doesn't miss workouts. And no, writing one sentence does not finish the novel, but it does cast a vote for I'm a writer. And doing things once or twice probably doesn't change your mind about it. But if you keep showing up and casting votes, you build up this body of evidence. And at some point, the weight on the scales, so to speak, like shifts in your favor. You get enough votes piled up that you start to think, yeah, actually, this is part of who I am. And that, I think, is the real long-term reason why habits are so meaningful, is that they start to shape the way that you look at yourself.
You gave an example about an ice cube melting in a room and
Mm.
how the ice cube can stay an ice cube until it gets to 32 degrees and then it has a state change. And I thought that that was a really great example of what it feels like to work towards something because it takes time in order to have a state change. Have you experimented with that on your end? Like, how did you come up with that idea of thinking of the ice cube that way?
Yeah, I don't remember where I first came up with the ice cube metaphor, but I do remember coming across a quote when I was working on the book that it hangs inside the locker room for the San Antonio Spurs, and I think about that a lot, and it kind of echoes the sentiment that you're bringing up here, which is that it says, whenever I feel like giving up, I think about the stonecutter who takes his hammer and bangs on the rock 100 times without it splitting in two. And then at the 101st blow, it cracks open. And I know that it wasn't the 101st that did it, but all the 100 that came before. And that's exactly how your habits work. The state change that you're referencing. A lot of the time, people work on habits for a month or 3 months and they don't have the results they want and they feel like giving up. But that work is not being wasted. It's just being stored. You're kind of building up this potential energy to reach that next state change. And so there's a little bit of trust that's required. There's a little bit of confidence and perseverance that's required, but it's very much a part of the process of habits leading to change. And this is, I think, a hallmark of any compounding process, which is that the greatest returns are delayed. The very beginning of any compounding curve, it's basically flat. You got to keep working for a while before you start to get to that hockey stick curve and it takes off. And a lot of state changes, a lot of life changes are like that. They require you to show up and put work in for months or even years before you break through to the next level. And what we're really getting at there is that delayed gratification is a central part of building habits. And I think that's what those quotes get at. I think that's what the Ice Cube gets at, and it's definitely a core part of the process.
I love the idea of the compound effect, and that's something that I practice every day in my life. Is it's about getting 1% better. And a lot of times, like the way that we consume information now, things are about going big or, this amazing thing happened. But what you don't see is all the years and months and time that went into making that big thing happen. And it only happens by doing the 1% better.
Yeah, the results of success are often highly visible and easy to see, but the process behind success is often invisible and like hidden from view. And there's also this other thing that happens, which is that, whether it's the traditional news cycle or social media, we tend to only talk about things once the result is there. Like you'll never see a story that says something like, a woman eats chicken and salad for lunch today. Like it's only a story when it's like, woman has lost 100 pounds, So we only talk about the Broadway show once it's a hit, not when it's in the middle of being written. We only talk about the, athlete's performance after they won the championship, not, in the off season when they're training. And so, for that reason, I think we tend to undervalue systems and process and habits. And the funny thing, the ironic thing is that we also badly want our results to change. Like we also badly want these better outcomes, but the results are not really the thing that needs to change. It's actually the system behind the results, is the process or the habits that precede them that need to shift. And if you can fix the inputs, the outputs will often fix themselves. So a focus on habits is very much connected to that kind of thinking and philosophy.
Yeah, and I think in our dialogue, like rewarding hard work, like Carol Dweck's fixed versus growth mindset, with fixed mindset, we're always rewarding the outcome of the thing. Oh, you're so talented. Oh, you're so smart. And it's kind of a running joke. Like I'm a professional cyclist, and people will be like, "Oh, I barely trained at all for that race," and that they were out training really, really hard. And it's this idea of I'm talented, therefore I didn't have to work hard. But really, if we can show that hard work in it of itself is of merit and almost even better than the thing that you get from the hard work, I think that makes the habits, the process, more appealing for us to want to do.
For sure. Yeah. Praise the effort rather than the outcome. I think that's definitely central to this kind of idea as well. And the people who, again, like kind of one of those little ironic twists, the people who get to enjoy the rewards are often the people who actually enjoy the process. Like it's the people who like training the most that often cross the finish line first. And it's the people who enjoy reading the most who look like they're the smartest ones, and so on. It's like the falling in love with the process leads to the outcome eventually.
But you also talked about, it was at the end of the book, something about like the people that can endure the pain the easiest, or who can endure the pain the longest of doing the habit, also are the ones who are the most successful.
There's this thing where like people often ask, what are your strengths? What do you love to do? What are you passionate about? But I think maybe an alternative angle, a different line of attack to answering that question is, what is the work that hurts you less than it hurts most people? Like what is the suffering that you can handle more than most people seem to handle? Or if we rephrase it a little bit differently, we would say, what seems like suffering to most people, but doesn't actually feel like that to you? And that's actually what you're very well equipped to do, because everything in life requires effort, requires trade-offs, requires energy and attention and commitment. And if those commitments don't really feel that hard to you, if they don't feel, doesn't mean you're not working hard. It just means that you seem to be able to handle it better than most people do. That's a real long-term advantage, because if it doesn't feel like suffering as much to you, then you can probably work harder on it for longer than most people will. Most people will quit before you will. And so that I think is probably where you'll end up finding your strength, which is wherever you have the ability to suffer.
Tracking habits is something that you've talked about a lot and has a lot of effective results. But there's something that I really liked that you mentioned was about when the measurement itself becomes the target, it ceases to become a good
Mm.
measure. And we were already kind of alluding to that earlier. Women loses 100 pounds, or like um, looking at only at race results, or those types of things. And it's really easy to get stuck looking at these outcomes. How many social media followers do I have? How many wins? How much money do I make? So how can people not get stuck, because you get rewarded for that, like publicly, whenever you start getting these outcomes. So how can you stay focused on the habits every day that guide you to the big picture instead of just getting the thing?
Yeah, it's a great point. And I think it's actually like a more nuanced point than you might think, because measurement is very important. It can be really helpful. Like when I track my workouts, I get stronger. When I measure how much I eat, like I get leaner. Like there's measurement can be very valuable in that sense. But the problem, as you mentioned, is when the measure becomes the target, when you start to forget that all of these measurements are actually a proxy for what you're really trying to achieve. They're little guidelines that try to keep you moving directionally in the correct way, rather than, it becoming all about that. It's like students, forgetting that this is actually about learning. It's not just about getting a good test score. And there, I was guilty of that. Like all I was trying to optimize for were good test scores. I
Me
didn't
too.
really care actually if I learned anything, like all I wanted was the A. And that becomes a problem in a lot of different areas of life. School is just one example of it. And so we need to make sure that measurements are guiding the process, but not necessarily becoming the sole target. And so for me, what I find, a lot of the things that you just mentioned, like the number on the scale or the race times or whatever, those are ultimate outcomes. I find it more helpful to measure like intermediate outcomes, or measuring the process. So, measuring the number of practice sessions or the number of reps, measuring the amount of words that you write every day or the number of articles you publish each week, like things that are moving you in that proper direction by measuring the process, rather than getting obsessed with the number of that's the final outcome. And that's a delicate dance, and it's different for each thing. It's different for each person depending on what you're optimizing for. But measurement can be both useful and it can be dangerous.
Yeah, I think it kind of depends on your personality too. Like there's the people that are sort of the achiever types, where they're just like pushing, pushing, pushing. Let me overtrain. Let me over research. Let me overdo it. And then there's seems to be the other camp, where the people that have a difficult time just getting the momentum to get going. So talking about the people who have difficulty getting going, and I think that all of us have different aspects of that in our life. Like for some of us, it's easy to get started in one area but really hard in another area. And even like myself, I was pregnant last year, and I was committed to riding my bike 6 days a week as long as I possibly could. And there was lots of days that I didn't want to get off the couch, and showing up was my goal. Instead of training session for 2 hours, or like looking back at all the things I had done previously as an athlete, my goal was just to show up. And if I didn't feel good after a certain amount of time, I would just turn around and go home. And you wrote about the 2 minute rule in your book, which I think is awesome and really helpful. So I'd love for you to talk about the 2 minute rule.
Yeah. Well, what you're kind of mentioning there, I think this is something a lot of people feel. We feel very all or nothing about our habits a lot of the time. It's like, well, if I can't do the full thing, then like, why even bother? And it's almost always better to do less than you had hoped than to do nothing at all. But it can be hard to get yourself to feel that way, particularly if you're an ambitious person. You're like, oh, I want to either do it 100 or 0. Um, so the 2-minute rule, what it does is it encourages you to say, take whatever habit you're trying to build, read 30 books a year, run a marathon, do yoga 4 days a week, whatever it is, and you scale it down to something that takes 2 minutes or less to do. So read 30 books a year becomes read one page, or do yoga 4 days a week becomes take out my yoga mat. And sometimes when I mention that, people resist it a little bit because they're like, okay, if this is some kind of mental trick and I know it's a trick, like why would I fall for it, basically? But I have this reader, his name's Mitch, and I mentioned him in Atomic Habits. He lost over 100 pounds. It's been over a decade now. He's kept it off. And when he first went to the gym, he had this rule where for the first 6 weeks, he wasn't allowed to stay for longer than 5 minutes. And it sounds kind of ridiculous, right? It's like he got in the car, drove to the gym, got out, did half an exercise, got back in the car, drove home. You're like, this is obviously not going to get the guy the results that he wants. But if you step back, what you realize is that he was mastering the art of showing up, right? Like he was becoming the type of person that went to the gym 4 days a week, even if it was only for 5 minutes. And I think that's a much deeper truth about habits that often gets overlooked, which is that a habit must be established before it can be improved, right? Like if you haven't made it the standard in your life, there's nothing to optimize. It's just a theory. And so you really need to focus on mastering the art of showing up. And I like that quote from Ed Lattimore, which is the heaviest weight at the gym is the front door. And I think that it really is the case a lot of the time. It's like that actually is the biggest rep is just stepping inside and getting started. So the 2 minute rule sort of helps you overcome that tendency for perfectionism or that tendency to be all or nothing and make sure that you're getting some reps in. The other thing that this does is it ties back to what we were previously talking about with identity-based habits, which is, it may only have been 5 minutes at the gym, but it still cast a vote for I'm the type of person who doesn't miss workouts. And that's really helpful both in the beginning and also when dealing with a big change, like you talking about the pregnancy. Maybe your workouts weren't as long or as arduous or as crazy as they used to be, but you were still casting votes for that being a really meaningful part of your identity. In some ways, those votes may have been even more meaningful than at a different stage in your life because it was suboptimal. The circumstances were not ideal, and I still got out there. And I think that in the long run counts for a lot and really helps to affirm that that's an important part of your identity and what you want to stand for.
Yeah, and I think, using the easy example of training or working out, like it doesn't matter who you are. You can be a world champion elite athlete, and you could be someone like your friend just getting started. Everyone has days where you don't feel like getting started, even if you love the thing, even if the thing is your passion. And just showing up and getting started and accepting that I'm not gonna be killing it every day. And in fact, I shouldn't expect to be killing it every day because that's not realistic either. It's really powerful whenever you start casting those votes.
For sure.
So, I like that you talked about the guy getting in the car, and that was the thing and driving to the gym. That was the thing that helped him create a habit because that was the decisive moment whenever he actually got started. And sometimes we think about the habit itself as the decisive moment. And you talk about decisive moments in your book. Can you give a few more examples?
So I like to think about these. Well, first, let me just step back. One of the core problems with building habits is that a habit technically is a behavior that's more or less automatic, something you do mindlessly, brushing your teeth, tying your shoes, whatever. But a lot of the things that we want to do when we use the word habit, like I want to get in the habit of writing 4 days a week, or I want to get in the habit of meditating, or want to get in the habit of working out consistently. I know what you mean when you use the word like that, right? You mean I want it to be a regular practice, but actually, in reality, it's not going to be mindless the way that brushing your teeth or tying your shoes is. So you have to focus carefully. Like, my point is that many of the things that matter most to us also require our concentration. And yet, we want to make those habitual. So, what do we do? And I think this decisive moment piece that you just brought up is the answer to that. The idea is to focus on the decisive moment, focus on the lead domino, the first action, and make that mindless, make that easy. And that will often determine how you spend the next chunk of time. So, for example, if we take the gym, there's a moment like 5:15 or so. My wife gets done from work, and either we change into our workout clothes and we go to the gym, or we sit on the couch and watch The Office and order Indian food. And like both of those are good nights, but they're very different nights. And the whole thing that determines it is, do we change into our workout clothes or not? If we change clothes, that's the decisive moment. Like the next 2 hours are already figured out. We'll get in the car, we'll go to the gym, we'll do the workout. Like it's already done at that point. And so I think the question to ask yourself is, one, what are the most important actions for me? Like, what are the things that make up my ideal day or really move the needle in whatever's important to me? And then two, what is the decisive moment that precedes that? What is the lead domino? And can I make that habitual? So rather than worrying about the whole workout, can I make it a habit that I always change into my workout clothes at the end of the workday? Because that will prime you and set you up for that next chunk of time to fall into place.
I think that's such an awesome point and such great advice because whenever we think about new behavior, we never think about that first small step that actually is a really big step.
Well, a lot of those choices, they seem really small, but what they do is they end up setting, one way to think about it is they set the menu of choices that you have to make in the next moment. So for example, let's say that you're standing in line, you're waiting for like 10 minutes, and you pull out your phone. Well, you actually have a variety of choices you could make in that moment. You could play a video game, you could check your email, you could browse social media, you could read an article. But that menu, those choices that I just listed, it was all set with the habit of pulling out your phone. So it's actually that decisive moment of checking your phone that determines what's available to you. And so the same thing is true for, all this other stuff. The decisive moment of, putting tying my running shoes. Yeah, I could sit on the couch and watch TV with my running shoes on, but once it's on, it's kind of like, well, now I sort of have a different menu of options in my mind. I'm thinking more about going for the run and getting out and moving and so on. So there's sort of a momentum that follows it. There's like it kind of restricts or sets the menu of choices that you have available. All of that is shaped by the action that precedes it. And so trying to master that is often a good place to start.
Yeah, and I think that also goes along with one of your laws of make it easy. If your shoes are on, it's easier to get out the door and get moving. If your
For
shoes
sure.
are in a closet somewhere and you can't find the other one, maybe the dog moved it, like you're not going to be putting those running shoes on.
I even have readers who will go to sleep in their running clothes so that all they have to do is wake up and just like slide their feet in the shoes and then they can step out the door.
You mentioned momentum, and momentum tends to be like we think of momentum as a positive momentum, but we can also have momentum that slows us down. So, say you didn't put your workout clothes on and you did sit on the couch and watch Indian food, and there are some days where you actually need the rest and you need to do that. But how do you make sure that that doesn't become the new habit?
Yeah. I mean, the way you phrase that I think is good because I feel like we all have experienced this, which is that it's rarely the first mistake that ruins you. It's like the spiral of repeated mistakes that follows. It's letting slipping up become a new habit that's often the problem in the long run. So the phrase or the philosophy that I like to keep in mind is never miss twice. If you are following a diet for 8 or 9 days and then the 10th day you binge eat a pizza, well, I wish that hadn't happened, but never miss twice. So let's make sure the next meal is a healthy one. Or if you always work out on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday and something happens and you miss your Friday session, wish that hadn't happened, but never miss twice. Let's make sure we get in there on Monday. And the more that you can do that, the more that you realize in the long run, those mistakes are just kind of blips on the radar. And at the end of the year, it doesn't really matter that much. But that's only true if you never miss twice. And I think this is a quality that as time goes on, I see it more and more in top performers, which is that, people at the top of their game or the top of their industry, they make mistakes like everybody else. Nobody is perfect, but they're very good at rectifying those mistakes and getting back on track quickly. They're really good at turning the ship around and getting right back to where they were before. And everybody else kind of lets that spiral into a different pattern or a larger problem. So correcting things quickly is definitely a big part of getting habits to stick in the long run.
Yeah, and something that I've been doing too is I think, how is my future self going to feel? And this is probably the identity piece, but how's the future part of me going to feel whenever I look back and see that I skipped that thing that I committed to doing? And
Mm.
that's been a powerful way. Whenever all the other things aren't working, I think I don't want to feel disappointed in myself and that I'm not the person I said I was.
That's powerful that you can do that. Anytime you can sort of time travel in your head and go forward and think about, what would me in a year want? What would me in 10 years want? It often enables you to make better choices in the moment. It can be hard sometimes for people to remember to do that, but the more that you can press fast forward on those consequences and see how that would play out, the more you're making choices for future you rather than present you, which usually pays off in the long run.
So let's talk about breaking bad habits. I think that there's some really great examples out there of making it harder and making it less attractive. Um, what are some of the most common things people have asked you? Like, I have this bad habit, I want to break it, and can we use that as an example?
Yeah, there are all kinds of, stuff from watching too much TV to playing too many video games to biting their nails to not working out consistently to sleeping in too much. Like there's all sorts of bad habits that people deal with that are fairly common. Um, I will say usually when I talk about breaking a bad habit, I think there are kind of two good places to intervene to start. So the first one, and I'll just use a couple personal examples as I talk through these. Um, it can be surprising how much you can reduce a habit reduce a bad habit simply by making it less visible or making it less obvious. So this is the inversion of the first law of behavior change. Rather than making it obvious, you want to make it invisible. So let's take one example. I'm like pretty much everybody else. If I have my cell phone next to me, I'll check it every 3 minutes just because it's right there. But I have a home office, and so I have this new rule. Well, I've been following it for about a year or two now, where I try to keep my phone in another room until lunch each day. And it doesn't work for every job, but it works for me. And what's interesting is that it's always like 30 seconds away. It's never far, but I never go get it. And so what I always wonder is like, well, did I want it or not? Like in one sense, I wanted it bad enough to check it every 3 minutes when it was next to me. But in another sense, I never wanted it so bad that I would work 30 seconds to go get it. And it's surprising how many habits are like this. Like you feel like you're spending too much money on electronics. Well, unsubscribe from the tech review channels on YouTube and from these unboxing videos and all this other stuff you're watching. Surprisingly, the spending might, reduce itself. Or you're trying to follow a diet, but you keep snacking. Well, don't follow food bloggers on Instagram. Like you're constantly triggering yourself to do the thing you're trying to avoid. So by reducing exposure to the cue, whether it's something physical like the phone sitting on my desk or something digital like who you follow online, that can help reduce the habit and the frequency with which you do it because you just don't think about it. So I often recommend starting there, even though it doesn't work for every habit, because it's so simple and so fast that you might as well just do it right away and try to set your environment up to be more beneficial. The second place that I think is a good place to look is the third law. So rather than making it easy, you want to make it difficult. And this comes down to increasing friction, to adding steps between you and the desired behavior. So take TV, for example. A lot of people feel like they watch too much television or play too many video games. But walk into any living room in America, like where do all the couches and chairs face? It's like, what is this room designed to get you to do? And I'm not saying you have to rearrange your entire house, right? But like there's a spectrum of choices. You could take the TV, put it inside a wall unit or a cabinet so that you're less likely to see it. You could take the remote control and put it inside a drawer and put a book in its place. You could take the chair that you usually sit in and turn it away from the TV, have it face like an end table with a book on it. And individually, none of those choices are going to radically transform your life. But you can imagine that if you make a dozen or 2 dozen or 50 choices like that, suddenly the good habit is now the obvious choice, right? The good habit is now the path of least resistance. And often we follow the path of least resistance. So the more that you can optimize your environment to make bad habits harder and higher friction and good habits easier and lower friction, the more you'll find yourself sliding into more productive behaviors.
I'm just smiling to myself because there's been a few things that I'll share with people that I've done with the TV. We didn't own a TV until maybe a year ago, but we got tired of watching Netflix like scrunched over on the TV or on the couch watching it on our laptop. So we thought, okay, we'll get a TV, but we don't want it to be the focal point of the room. So we bought one of those like presentation things. So it's basically a TV on wheels. So we actually and we noticed that if we let, and we said we don't want the TV in the middle of the living room ever, but the TV kept sitting there because it took energy to wheel the TV away. But we've actually started unplugging the TV and wheeling it, so it's the front isn't facing us. So in order to watch Netflix, you have to wheel the TV back into the center of the living room and plug it back in. And most of the time, that's enough of a deterrent that we don't do it. And another example of something is I know lots of people listening to this podcast love beer, and I love beer as well. And whenever the beer is cold and in the fridge, it's really easy to just open the fridge and drink one. So we actually have a rule in our house where there is no cold beer in the fridge. We keep the beer in a cabinet, and in some cases, we have some of the beer locked or some of the stuff like locked in the basement where you have to actually get a key out, open the door, and go down the stairs, get the warm beer, bring it back up, and put it in the fridge or freezer and wait however long it takes. And that has helped really make you put some thought into, do I actually want this beer? Do I want it bad enough where I'll wait 20 minutes? Or is this just some bad habitual thing that I'm doing that I don't want to be doing, and I'm making it a temptation when it's right in front of my face every single time I open the fridge?
It's remarkable how much that can matter. I want to make 2 points here. One is those are great examples of increasing friction. And this isn't going to solve if you're actually struggling with like being an alcoholic or something. Like it's not going to solve an actual addiction, but most people are not dealing with that with most of their bad habits, and it's surprising how useful stuff like this can be. And then the second one is it's also in the long run. It sounds like you're already kind of at this point. It's not really like in the beginning, it feels kind of like a trick that you're trying to play on yourself or something, or like you're trying to intentionally make it difficult or whatever, jump through hoops. But what ends up happening is it just becomes the default. The default is when you buy beer, you store it in this locked room downstairs, and that's just kind of where beer is. And so it's not like you're doing it to try to get it away from yourself. It's just that's the default for where we keep it. And because that's the default, it ends up becoming harder to get to and higher friction over time, and it just becomes more normal. It also is surprising, is it? It's like it's surprising that it can make such a difference. That like, well, you might watch Netflix for an hour, but the fact that you would have to turn the projector around is too big of a hassle. So you're like, oh, I'm not going to bother.
Yeah, I like that because it just really makes you only do something if you truly want it. Or like with food, if I want to eat like something that's a treat, I make myself eat something healthy first, and then I can decide if I still want the treat. Because with these
Mm.
cravings and these dopamine hits that we get when our body says, yeah, you want that, get the thing, and like the anticipation of getting the thing, you want to actually make sure you want the thing for real instead of just doing it because it's there.
I think one of the most interesting examples I've had in my personal life is that uh, I was traveling. I was in Milwaukee, and I was with some family, and we wanted to get pizza. And when we ordered the pizza, when we made the call, I was starving. I was like, "Yes, this sounds great." But in between getting it placed and waiting for it to be delivered, I was like, "You know what? I'm just going to do some push-ups." And I don't know. I did 3 sets or 5 sets or something. It wasn't some huge workout. And I did those. And after I got done, I was like, "Actually, I'm not even really that hungry right now." And what I realized was that actually I didn't want pizza. What I wanted was to change my state. And I think a lot of the time, the things that we crave, whether it's, some kind of snack or watching TV or drinking a beer or whatever, what we really want is to feel differently. We really want to change our state. And so by substituting something else and by making the default, bad habit a little higher friction, you find a different way to change your state. And as long as you feel differently, as long as you find a way to feel better, you don't actually need it to come through that vehicle, through a can of beer or through an episode on Netflix or something like that. It can come however you want, but you're looking for some kind of emotional change. So a lot of the process of breaking bad habits or finding substitutes is just finding a different way to get yourself to feel the way you want to, finding a healthier alternative that can help you change your state.
There's some interesting research out there about willpower and like Kelly McGonigal's book, The Willpower Instinct. But what if people say to you, like, oh, like I'm trying to change this habit, I'm trying to track everything, I'm trying to do all the things, but I just don't have the willpower? How does that play into motivation?
Well, I mean, willpower is a really important quality in life, so I don't want to act like it doesn't matter. But my default is always to say, let's focus on the environment first. So, structure determines behavior. And what I mean by that is that the structure of the spaces around you, the places you work, the things that are on your desk, the things that are on your kitchen counter, those determine what actions you take. Like when you go back to your house or your apartment, you walk in through the door, you don't climb in through the window because that's what the structure determines, right? It shapes the action that you take. And so a lot of people feel like they don't have willpower, but usually it's one of two other things that are the problem. So the first problem is a lot of people think they lack motivation when what they really lack is clarity. So they think they wake up and think, "Oh, I hope I feel motivated to work out today, or I hope I feel motivated to write today, or whatever." Whereas like if I look at my schedule on if it's Monday at 5 p.m., I that's just when I work out. I'm not deciding to work out. That's just like when it happens. I'm not hoping I'll feel motivated to do it. It's already decided. It already has a space to live. So because I have that clarity around what I'm doing and where I'm doing it and when I'm doing it, it's much easier to find the motivation because it's already been determined ahead of time. So getting clear about what you want and when and where a habit will live in your routine and in your schedule, I think helps a lot. So that's the first thing. People think they lack motivation or willpower, but actually they lack clarity. And then the second thing is people think they lack willpower, but actually they're in an environment where they're trying to swim upstream. And trying to swim upstream, in the long run, your environment will always win. Like I can walk into the kitchen and see a plate of cookies, and maybe I'll resist them the first time I go in, or the third time I go in, or the eighth time I'll go in. But at some point, I'm going to eat them. And so asking yourself to do that, it does not mean that you are a failure. It doesn't mean that your willpower is lacking. It just means that your environment is suboptimal. And so trying to design a better environment, designing an environment that doesn't require willpower or doesn't require like a Herculean effort to do the right thing, that I think is a much more fruitful place to focus. Design a system that serves you and that makes the good action easy, and you'll find that your willpower probably increases overnight.
And is the answer the same if I say what about grit and determination and not quitting? Because those are kind of different than getting started.
Well, so the thing is, grit, and this is why I said willpower, grit, perseverance, determination, take whatever discipline, whatever, variant of the word you want. They're very important qualities in life, but here's the thing: life is going to be hard regardless, right? Like there's going to be all kinds of challenges, there's going to be all types of battles, there's going to be competition, there's going to be difficulty, whether you try to make it easy or not. The idea that you like wouldn't want to optimize your environment because that somehow would mean you don't need to be gritty and don't need to have determination, it doesn't add up to me. Like I think in reality you want both. You want to design the most optimal environment possible for you to thrive and perform at the highest level. And then you want to flip on the switch mentally and, become determined and gritty and persevere and have an incredible work ethic. So it's not either or, it's both and.
Mm-hmm. And like a lot of habits can be intrinsically motivated, or how we measure the habits can be intrinsically motivated. Like if you have something on your phone and it's just you clicking the check or like crossing the calendar, that's intrinsic motivation where you're accountable to yourself. But some people, and I'm referencing Gretchen Rubin's The Four Tendencies book about how some people need extrinsic motivation and people holding them accountable, whereas other people need more to hold themselves accountable. Does this type of framework work for people that need somebody else to hold them accountable? Because when you're the one just checking every single day that you did it and nobody else is there saying, hey, you didn't do this, it might not work for other people.
Yeah. I think the broad overarching idea that you need to be willing to experiment and find out what works for you, and maybe, try a little bit things that seem to be more intrinsic and some things that are more extrinsic, and figure out like what works in your case. This essentially a broad philosophy of experimentation and a willingness to have some trial and error. Look, that's going to be essential for anybody building any habit. Like you cannot just read about a theory and then somehow make it work. Like at some point you have to try it, and that requires some level of willingness to experiment and figure out how to fit it into your own life. So in that sense, yes, of course, everybody's going to have their own little idiosyncrasies and own tendencies and so on. Um, the dividing motivation into intrinsic and extrinsic, I think is my thinking has evolved on this to the point where now what I would say is we divide them so that we can discuss them cleanly. But in reality, there isn't actually a division between intrinsic and extrinsic. Perhaps there are some things that are more intrinsic and some things that are less intrinsic. There's a blending. So if you ask yourself, why am I intrinsically motivated to do a lot of these things, and you keep asking why, what you often end up getting to is the reason I'm intrinsically motivated is because I think it will help me with something extrinsic. It will help people view me better, or it will help me achieve something more, or whatever. It will give me higher social standing. And so this is even further true because if you ultimately get down to say, well, I'm just doing it because it makes me feel good. And then you say, okay, that seems very intrinsic, but why does it make you feel good? And again, it often becomes because, well, I look better in other people's eyes or whatever. So the point that I'm getting to is that humans are a social species, and we have evolved and learned and connected with other people for thousands, millions of years. And so there is a deep connection between what you want for yourself and what others think of you and what you think of them, and how we all work together and connect and collaborate. So I think my ultimate punchline to this is that do what works for you, whether it's intrinsic or extrinsic. It doesn't really matter how it's perfectly defined, but it does require some level of experimentation and a willingness to try things to figure out what exactly feels right for your situation, your circumstance. So yeah, there's always going to be a little bit of difference for each person, but I think different strategies can work in different circumstances.
Yeah, and I'll take it a step further. And we always hear like you shouldn't care what other people think, and don't do things because everybody thinks you should. And there's a certain level where you need to be doing things that are right for you, and not just because everyone else is doing it. But inherently saying that, oh, it doesn't matter what anybody else thinks, that goes against our nature as humans who want to fit in with a group.
Well, and I'm starting to find that a lot of things that sound simple on the surface, the actual truth of the matter is that both extremes are true. And the question is not if it's don't pay attention to people or always pay attention to people. The question is when. And so, in some cases, yeah, it makes sense to go against the crowd, think for yourself, do what's best for you. But if you only do that, then you're not willing to get feedback. You become stubborn. You don't grow. There's a lot of growth and learning that can happen from listening to other people. You can spot blind spots better if you get feedback from others. So you don't want to miss out on that either. So you need to the question to ask is when should I do this, not if you should do it. And I think that's true for many different things. I would say that's true for like work-life balance. A lot of people think that having work-life balance means just kind of doing everything at like 70%. But actually, I think it's the opposite. I think it's being very focused and obsessive about the work that you love and being 100% on that, but not all the time. And then you flip the switch and you be 100% focused on family and relaxation and, giving yourself a break. So the question again is not if, but when. And that can take a lifetime to learn. It's easy to say, but it's much harder to practice.
Yeah, with balance, I actually call it intentional imbalance because then you are choosing to spend all your time going all in on something and you're not trying to do this thing where you're on the pendulum.
I think that's a great way to phrase it. That's a intentional imbalance at strategic moments and in the right way and focused in the right areas. That sounds much more fruitful to me in the long run.
So let's talk about motion versus action. I was laughing whenever I was reading this part of the book because I've been trying, like, I'm embarrassed to even say this, but I've been trying to write my own book for years. And I am in, like, I get stuck in the motion. Like, I gotta do more research. I gotta, like read more about, like, how to write a book. And I don't actually sit down and write the pages. And it's so easy to think that you're actually doing something when you're even researching for a book or researching how to train, researching how to change your diet, and then not actually ever doing anything about it.
Yeah, the way that I think about it, and I've dealt with all this stuff as well, and it's kind of like motion is the pre-work and action is the actual work. Motion is related to the thing that you want to do. It's researching the book you want to write, or it's learning about how to write a best-selling book, or it's talking to other authors. But action is the thing that could actually deliver the outcome you want. It's writing sentences, it's revising paragraphs, it's working on the actual book manuscript itself. And the same thing is true for many other areas of life. Like it doesn't matter how many times you go to the gym and talk to a personal trainer, talking to a personal trainer will never get you in shape. So that is motion. Whereas doing 5 squats, that's action because getting under the bar could actually deliver the result that you want. And it doesn't mean that research and preparation are never necessary. Like they can be very important things. But the problem is that planning often becomes its own form of procrastination. And when that is true, when you're in motion so much that you're not actually moving forward, you're stuck in motion, you're not taking action. You're stuck in the research and planning phase. You're not actually delivering, doing things that could get a result. So what I find is that, and again, this may differ depending on the person and the personality, but for me, I like researching and planning and kind of thinking through those things and strategizing. And so my bias is to be in motion. So I'm always trying to remind myself to have this bias toward action, to try to focus on, moving faster, taking the next step, doing something meaningful that can actually deliver a result. Because motion feels good, but action actually delivers a result. And I actually think that's one reason why people often find themselves sliding into motion is that it feels like you're making progress, so you can rationalize it and you can feel good, but actually you're just delaying the possibility of failure. We're trying to, it's the fear of failure that makes people avoid taking action. So you've told yourself for years that you want to start a business, but all you do is brainstorm business names and try to come up with business card designs and talk to somebody about getting a logo made, which none of that stuff will ever deliver a paying customer. Doesn't mean you don't need to do it at some point. It just means that's motion. It's not action. So the difference between those two can be a fairly meaningful gap. And as much as possible, I try to get myself to focus on taking action rather than sliding into motion.
Yeah, and I think that sometimes we get stuck on having perfect action. Like if I just learn a little bit more about this, then whenever I finally take action, I'll waste less time because now my action will be better. But you don't necessarily learn. I mean, you need to do the research, but you learn the most by actually doing the thing and failing your way to the
Right.
top. And it's just so hard to
And
do that
that's kind of an
sometimes.
ironic thing, like we tell ourselves, oh, I need to learn more, but actually the way to learn more is to take action. Um, And I think there's a little bit of a skill associated with that too, which is that people often avoid taking action because failure seems too consequential. It seems too big and painful. And so if you can figure out a way to scale your trials down, to scale your experiments down so that you're not scared of failure anymore, then you can take action right away and you can learn from it. But your point is definitely spot on, which is that the best way to learn is not by reading or researching or theorizing about it. The best way to learn something is by actually doing that thing. And the faster you can get to that, the faster your learning will be.
On your Twitter account, you ask lots of interesting questions of your audience, like polling them for what they're doing or challenges that they're having. What's something that you're working on right now?
Um, so I get all kinds of interesting insights from Twitter. I'm trying to learn more about making good choices and decisions right now. I'm trying to learn more about what I guess I could call would be like high leverage strategy. So if you read Atomic Habits, I think a lot of people find it very useful, helpful for building better habits. But one of the questions that you could have at the end of it is, okay, I understand how to build better habits, but which habits should I build? Like, where should I focus? And that I think is a natural follow up question. It's something I've been thinking about a lot recently and writing about more, which is how to focus your attention and energy and effort in the best area, how to select the best habits out of the universe of options and make sure you're using your time in the highest and most effective way. And I think that if you can combine those two strategies, if you can make good choices and focus on high leverage, high energy, high output tasks, and you can build good habits so you can take action and be consistent with doing those things, that's a really potent combination and can really add up in the long run. So anyway, I've been thinking more about strategy and choices recently.
Yeah, and I think that making decisions is something that is also difficult with how many options we have for careers these days, especially for younger people who are, in college or people who want a career change anytime in their life and they could go in any single direction and they end up not making any decision because it's just too overwhelming to pick something.
Yeah, the it's interesting. For much of human history, information was scarce, and so finding information was like the discovery was the big thing that was helpful. Now, information is so abundant and so easily accessible that the skill is actually like filtering through the noise and figuring out what to focus on. And you're right. I mean, in many cases, whether it's information overload or just so many options that are available, it can feel paralyzing. So, I think curation and editing and refinement and filtering, those are increasingly important skills. I think they're more important now than they had ever been before. And as information just continues to increase, as the volume increases, it's probably going to become even more important.
My last question is about having a healthy relationship with social media. I know that writers tend to be more present on Twitter versus any other platform, and other people, more visual people, are on Instagram. How do we create healthy habits around having a good relationship with social media and also how that impacts our decisions and our self worth?
Yeah, that's a big question. I don't know that I have all the answers to that. I'll just offer a couple kind of off the cuff ideas, just thinking about my own social media use. I mean, first of all, these platforms can be, your experience on them can be radically different depending on who you follow. In a sense, who you choose to follow, whether it's on Instagram or Twitter or wherever, it's kind of like you get to build your own little world. You get to create your own city, and you get to select who the citizens are going to be. And so I think it makes sense to be very careful, very methodical about who is going to live in your little city, who is going to be part of that information flow. And if you do a good job of curating who you're following, these platforms can be incredibly valuable. I mean, I've had to spend a lot of time. I mean, it's actually like it's probably dozens of hours, maybe even 100 hours that I've spent looking at different profiles. Who do other people follow? Who should I follow? Whatever. Like it's a big time investment to really get it nailed and dialed in. And for a lot of people, I don't know, it might not be worth that for you. But you can sort of shortcut it. Like you can look at who I follow, or you can look at who other people are that you like, who you follow, who they follow, and you can just follow all those people, and that'll kind of give you a quick way to do it. But if you do that well, if you get the feed curated to in a way that such that the only posts you're seeing are ones that are really useful and serve you, then suddenly it becomes like a really positive and insight dense information flow. And so for me now, when I log on to Twitter, I get a lot of great ideas from there. I find things to read. I, come across interesting insights, and it's only because I've spent all that time curating that information flow. So I think that's kind of the first big lesson is be careful about who you choose to put into your city. Be careful about who you choose to follow. And then, there's a secondary thing, which is a lot of people just feel like they kind of check it too often. They check it mindlessly. I think what ends up happening is that the question you could ask yourself is, what do I do when I have nothing to do? So, in other words, I'm waiting in line and I have 7 minutes free. What do I do? A lot of people check Instagram. Or, I'm sitting on the couch and the commercial break came on for the TV show I'm watching. I don't know. What do I do? I don't have anything to do for the next 3 minutes. A lot of people check their phone. And I think instead, what I would say, what I try to do, but don't always do. I'm not perfect at this, but I try to have and I think you only need one thing, but you try to have one default action that is better. So for me, right now I'm working on my second book. And so the answer to what do I do when I have nothing to do is I work on that book. Either I read something for it, or I open up the manuscript and I start, editing a paragraph or something. But the point is, whenever I'm bored, whenever I have a downtime, that's the thing I go to. And I think that having something other than social media to be that default action, it can be very helpful, because a lot of people feel like they spend too much time, but it's just because it's the thing they always do when they have nothing to do. So if you can substitute something more productive into that slot, and you can be careful about who you follow and curate your feed, I think what you find is that social media becomes really fruitful and valuable, and you don't spend too much time on it. So those are probably the two things that I've tried to do the most related to social.
And speaking of when people want to follow you, where should they go to follow you?
Well, if you've enjoyed this conversation, then Atomic Habits is probably the best thing to check out next. So you can just check out the book at atomichabits.com. And if you want to check out my other writing, that's all at jamesclear.com. If you click on articles, they're organized by topic, by category, so you can kind of browse around and see what's interesting to you. And if you like it, the best thing to do is probably to join the newsletter. So jamesclear.com/newsletter to sign up for that, and atomichabits.com to check out the book.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show. And it was such a treat to get to chat with you about all of these really important things.
Oh, thank you so much. I enjoyed it.